Good morning. My name is Javier Rascón. He is Roberto Santos. We are both malware analysts at Telefónica, and we work at CSIRT, SCC. Here we would like to share with you an analysis of an incident that one of our clients had. This is the table of contents. First of all, we tell you how the event unfolded. Then we took a look at the performance of bug, or so to speak. Then we will move on to some techniques. And then we will see how we fixed it, and then a number of conclusions. Starting off with the first symptoms. It was June 2019. In the afternoon, we had the news that a client had an AV alert triggered, and some of the equipment were rebooting. Well, we did not panic because, well, this may be habitual thing, and we couldn't really find any immediate association. Often clients don't know what is happening to their system, so rebooting could be associated with an upgrading of the software. The first thing that we had access to was to the exe file that had been detected by an AV company. The name of it was suspicious, so didn't sound very legit, and it was level of detection was low. We thought that could be a false positive, but the AV that detected it was reliable, and it could also be a bad sign and could be quite a recent malware. So therefore, we didn't really know whether that was something good or bad. Then we could see low entropy. If you see that entropy of bug is high, you may suspect something hidden, but there may be hidden information without having a high level of entropy. Then we put it in our sandbox, and then we could see that an executable file was being downloaded from an unknown domain. But that executable was signed by Microsoft. It was a legit signature. And we wonder what is happening. We are really confused here. We took a closer look at that file being downloaded, and they say it is a legit upgrading of Microsoft. We thought, well, perhaps this is an upgraded tool developed by the IT guys at the company. Sometimes what your right hand does, your left hand is unaware of. We thought that that could be the case, and say why a malware is logging on to an unknown domain and downloading an upgrade. And actually, this was quite noisy to be a malware. If this was the origin of the upgrading, it didn't really make sense for a malware to reboot your system, to download a KB, and to download it and installing it. It was quite suspicious. As I say, we went ahead with it, and it was quite likely to be a dropper, but it was an executable with no persistence whatsoever. It was also that made it even more strange, and later on we could see that persistence had been done with kits. Then we could see that it was compiling information from the equipment, local IP, domain name, the version of the operating system, whether it was connected through NAT or not, and then the graphic card. because we were more focusing on finding the IOCs to give them to the client. We did not pay too much attention to the graphical card, the graphic card. And that information at the end of the day was being exfiltrated to other unknown services. And then this is what told us that it was definitely suspicious. And one of the things that we found quite suspicious, as it is the case for many malware, so that there is no such engine that could identify them. It could, by calling API, obtain user agent string. It obtained information from the equipment so that it would pass more unnoticed. Then we continued to analyze the bug, and the version of the operating system, if below Windows 7 or Windows 7 2008 R2, it stopped. It did not continue running, so we couldn't really figure out what was happening. And then we also checked whether the crypt32 DLL version was the version that the malware was expecting. In case it did not find the version that it was expecting, the KB that we said at the beginning was being installed and the system was being rebooted. It was installing an upgrading file and rebooting the system. It didn't really make any sense to us. After that upgrading, it downloaded an executable signed by company Lisas Limited, SAH1, SAH256, and that system was being validated by the OS, or that signature was validated by the OS. A colleague contacted Microsoft to deactivate that signature in the future. And then after working with other colleagues from Telefonica, we could see that the reason for installing that upgrade, the crypt32 DLL libraries do not support SAH1 and SAH256. It took us a long time to find that out, and actually now we could understand it more. And now, after downloading the executable file, signed file, created a service related to that executable file. We knew it was already a malware, but we wanted to find out more and to understand the objective of the an executable using a signature. So for the OS to validate it would not be a usual executable. As we could see here, it was a driver. The subsystem value tells us that it is native type. That is to say, it is a driver. So it looked quite good, and we could see that the analysis would take quite a long time. Again, the attackers didn't want to be noticed a lot through high entropy and double packaging. First unpacking, and then it generated an executable code, a code that unpacked another code, and both codes interacted with each other, the first with the second one and the second one with the first one. Therefore, we could not, that prevented us from working with the latest executable or the last executable file that had been unpacked. So the attackers had done a good job there. And then when the driver was run, it also, when the file was being executed, it checked whether it was installed to be installed through the boot. If that was not the case, it was copied with a different name, with the same name service, and therefore it was ready to be executed at booting of the system, a system booting. It is important, before we move on with the analysis, to see how the attackers set up or created this infection. This was the first exe file detected. Below, we see kernel mode. This was the driver that was hiding the actions of the attacker, and Roberto will tell you more about that. It launched and infected other processes carrying out malicious actions. The executable was in charge of hiding the other processes, yet there was a communication between the processes, both in user mode and in kernel mode. We'll tell you more about that. We saw, probably this was from Rootkit, we could see that through some indicators from analysis from 2012, quite similar to this, what we were seeing. And Necurs used to do this communication in the past through IOCTL, but now that communication is done through some commands. When the processes of the attacker wanted to communicate with the driver, they had to fulfill a number of requirements for the driver to start listening to these processes. The key had to be in HKLM system. The value should be the THID of the thread that was writing, and then the log had to be a binary log, and then the size of that value should be at least of 4 bytes. And when the processes of the attacker communicated with the driver, simulated writing, but it was actually the driver who was doing that. The driver was getting the order for writing in log, but it was never, that information was never eventually written on the register. Some commands were either to send orders, because the user level processes were the ones that were communicating with the attacker. So somehow they had to give instructions to the rootkit about the different processes. Or those commands could give orders to the rootkit or could also request information. Here we see how ls ask this process, the thread of the process that is communicating with the attacker, the thread ID shows on the screen, and the driver is answering through the value 6300. Here there is an example of commands by attackers. The first bytes stand for the command, giving the order, telling it what to do, and the other commands are the parameters that the command receives, if any. This is a list of all the commands. These, in 11 paths, we have carried out a comprehensive analysis. For those of you who are interested in finding out more about these commands, we see different type of orders that the rootkit may receive. The rootkit has blacklists for some legit processes, so there are several commands that will help us upgrade these lists so that the rootkit is updated and to infect other processes. So as I said, all those commands are detailed in our report. As oftentimes when you program, you know that you have to store information on the equipment. The rootkit, instead of keeping that information in a file, was also using the log to keep information, or to store information. They did a good job there, and then they use AES to store that information. And I said, well, they are quite decent attackers. Actually, you just don't want to find like low-level, so to speak, attackers. And they kept information in the service. Now we show you how they stored information. The type of information that was stored was different kind. Could either be binary. The key on the SO1 value was the place where the binary of the rootkit was stored, or on SO2 value, the DLL injected in the user mode was stored. They also kept stored information about the installation of the actual rootkit. For us, it was quite interesting because it allowed us to produce a timeline of of the actual attack. And actually, when the equipment was rebooted and the driver was started, the number of value stored in SO8 increased by 1. So this led us to think that perhaps malware as a service was being used. We have not proved that, we have not checked that, not yet. So we have the register and then also blacklist, so that this rootkit worked as an antivirus. So here on the blacklist we have names of processes, texts on the signatures of executables, or text that appeared on the version, or the names of the files that the attackers did not want to be executed. So my colleague will tell you more about how to protect rootkit, how rootkit is being protected and how it works as an antivirus. The numbers here show a comparison. It was back in 2012 when we produced or when we analyzed Necurs. There has been a more recent analysis about this very same bug. But regarding deep analysis, it's been a long time since this type of deep analysis has been done. In 2012, we could see that this register entry, the number of the processes that are suspicious were above 137. Through forensics, we could see that attackers has gone over 700 numbers of files that were suspicious. We could see that with the text of the signatures. They have shifted from 33 to over 150, and they have added a resource to the text of the version. And because they just didn't want to check the names of the processes of the text of the signature, so they decided to include these checks so that no benign and executable file that could detect them would pass unnoticed to them. So this is a real case of corona. Oh, sorry. Well, everyone is aware that in Telefonica there is a person infected with coronavirus. So we worked hand in hand with our colleagues from forensics analysis. They had one equipment infected, and they allowed us to recover those values from the register. We could recover that, as I say, because this was an analysis done on a dead equipment. The rootkit was not active. This is the entry. That specific entry, well, the register key of the service. So the actual root of the binary was stored, as well as information as to how to reboot itself, or it stored that information, but also the register value, SO1, SO2, etc. And that was quite useful when it came to delivering information to our forensic colleagues. So these are the names of the processes that attackers have been injecting. I did not say that before. Necurs is one of the botnets. Well, one of the oldest and most persistent and most widespread botnets nowadays. Notice the hard work they've been doing. Names of processes. They also stored comments about AVs that executed and checked. So this is not only limited to the process and the name of the AV, but they analyze the internal operation of the AVs to find out the executable files that are used. So we have a huge list of process names. The same goes for signature texts. I'm sure that some of them are familiar to you, and also the texts that are found on the actual resource. And now I'd like to give the floor to Roberto. I will tell you a bit about hiding techniques that we found on the rootkit. This is where we focused our analysis, as we thought it was the most relevant part to focus on. So what is most interesting when you take a look at a rootkit is the actual hiding. Rootkit will deliver or will hide itself as well as other elements in the system. We have classified these hiding techniques in 4 types. First one, the one that is used for the register. Javier told you more about that. Register is used to launch or send commands. It also hides some processes of the actual rootkit in user mode and in another mode. We also have analysis tools, anti-malware tools, and if time allows us, we also tell you about some of the injections we found. So first of all, we'd like to share with you some background information. The rootkit gives a list of protected processes. This is a list of identifier of threads of processes. The rootkit relies on them, so therefore keeps them stored on list. It keeps several processes in user mode, but one of them is known as the accomplice process. It is the first one that goes into user mode. We are not going to go into detail and tell you what the accomplice process does, but I would like you to know that there is an element in the user mode that is part of the actual attack, and now callback functions. They take place at the level of the kernel. Understanding this is not difficult, especially for those who can program, but at the end of the day, the philosophy is exactly the same. We have a function which is being registered at the kernel, and it will wait for any potential event. For instance, the creation of a file, creation of a process, you name it. We register callback function. For instance, this one here, the register.
So when we register this callback function that is registered this interface, we will be waiting for an event, and when this event happens, we not only call the callback function, but it will hit the call. It will block the call between the user mode and the kernel mode. It would be in the middle, and it can modify it as it wishes. So this interface that we have here is the one that has to implement the functions that are registered through CMRI star callback, that are the calls that are intercepted by the register. The first parameter, the callback context. Well, this is not very necessary to understand the layout, but it's a parameter that we send when we register the callback function, and it is sent always that we call the callback function. But the important ones are the argument 1 and argument 2. Argument 1, when we call it, will tell us what operation is being implemented. For example, a create value in the registry, or a delete K, and so on and so forth. And argument number 2 will be given by what the argument 1 says. We will have more accurate information about the operation that has been taking place. And the important thing of this argument number 2 is that, normally speaking, it will identify the root, although the value key where this callback is being created. So why do they use callback functions? In the end, I think that it is quite intelligent, because they are legitimate functions of the system. Many of them, not to say all of them, are documented, and eventually we're not modifying the system, we're not doing anything weird, so many protections won't apply. Like, for example, password 64, we're not patching anything, and we are accomplishing the goal. So, for example, the first protection technique that we're going to say is the protection technique against a registry. So what do? We use the API function CM register callback. CM means content manager, that it is, as Windows calls, a registry. So CM register callback will register a callback about the Windows registry. Will intercept all the calls that are made on the Windows registry. And what we'll be able to do with this callback when we use it, when the attackers use it, it has been implemented so that they can give them protection about registry keywords, and it will allow them to execute commands. So it is like two parts of the same callback. Here we have a fragment of the registry keys that we want to protect. For example, the one where your service is installed, basically so that we can't read, install, we can't identify where the malware is. So the first thing they do is to look whether the thread that is trying to access the registry is among the infected threads or not. If it is among these threads, it will go through the green line, the operation won't be filtered. If not, Rootkit will see whether it has to filter the operation or not. And with the argument number 1 that we've mentioned before, it will analyze the operation that it is doing. In this case, they are seeing if they are doing a delete K or a set value. These are not the same operations that Rootkit filters, but they are the ones that fit it in the slide. So if these are the operations that it wants to protect, the next thing that it's going to have a look at would be to see, using argument number 2, using the key or the value, it will have a look to see whether what it is trying to write is where it is trying to protect or not. So if all these things happen, it will give a mistake, it will give a bug, and that's almost it. It doesn't have anything else. So, a case study. So one of the things that is also protected is the fact of reading the keyword that we were saying before. So what will happen? We'll try to look, for example, well, all the Windows services are stored at this path of the registry. So when we have a look at the registry keyword where the malware is kept, that has been called marronero, we'll get a bug, we'll get an error. Basically, it says access denied. We won't know what's going on from our user perspective. So another thing that we've found is the protection of the Rootkit projects. We were going to use OB register callback. It was in this case, it's a protection. OB would be object, and not only object, but also this function will have a parameter that will speak about the creation of object handles. Among these objects, we could find process and threads. So the first thing that we're going to do is to look at these objects to see whether they are an object or a thread. And when we are intercepting the handle's creation, well, the handle is important because that's a previous step to any operation that we implement on objects, and this handle defines both the object that we want to access and the authorizations it has. So the rootkit will do something very simple. It will have a look at a non-protected process, and if it's trying to make operations over a protected process. If so, they will try to apply a mask, and it will remove the ones that it doesn't want us to have. For example, if we want to open a process where we can create a thread and we can end it up, we will have a handle, and it will return a handle without the authorization. So that's a little bit weird, because the way that Windows works is, well, if we ask for an authorization but we won't get it, we won't have an error handle. So protection techniques. It goes with the blind list that Javier has mentioned before. So it would be more or less similar. And we're going to use another callback function in order to intercept the mapping of new binaries in the memory. So we're going to check the properties of this binary against the blacklist that Javier has mentioned. This as 0304 through 05, that were the names of the file, the version field, and signature. So once we have checked this, the rootkit makes a decision about whether patching the file or not. If it has been matched against one of the blacklists, if it has not been matched against one of the blacklists, we wouldn't do anything. The binary file would be executed normally. If it has matched against one of the binary of the blacklist, sorry, we'll patch the binary, and it will be normally executed. We've changed the entry point. Yeah, nothing happens if it's executed correctly. So we have two callbacks that work using this way of working. The first one would be the one that would be analyzing the process from a user perspective. So the first thing we're going to do is to, well, the first thing we use a stack attach process by YID, so that the root, as in a kernel mode, would be executing the same process that we're trying to map. And the important thing is that it has access to its memory. And when it has access to its memory, if there is somebody here that works with reversing, can see very clear that it's accessing the entry point, and the last line modifies it. How does it modify it? It includes a red. So the file is executed, but the first thing that it is executed is a return function, and the file is executed, but it only executes an instruction that is a return. So over the routine X function, that is the one that we use to perform this attack function, I was reading a Porsche book the other day that said that many drivers and components of the system can register notification functions about process creation, like PCZ create process notify routine. So we can detect the binary creation with this function. So up to here it works. After that, it says that these functions allow us to disable or blocking the process creation. The funny thing comes here, and it says that this provides the manufacturers with anti-malware solutions this provides the anti-malware solutions manufacturers another way of improving security to the operational system, either with blacklists, hashes blacklists, or other techniques. And well, I read this at Windows Internals. And well, it's a very good book. I don't want to criticize it, but it was quite fun. It was quite fun to read it. And well, I'm going to move on a little bit because we're running out of time. But well, basically, this is the same protection technique, but applied on kernel mode. So instead of using the callback function that was used before, we use ps-set load image notify routine X, and instead of using the functions to manage the memory in user mode, we use the kernel one. We have access to the kernel memory in order to blacklist kernel elements, but in the end we do the same. We modify the entry point, we return an error, and that's it. So for you to understand much better, this would be our antivirus code that we want to execute, and when we make the rec, and it matches some of the blacklist, what it does is to put this, okay? This doesn't compile, okay? Don't try to compile it. It's just an example. Okay, and to wrap up, well, we've wanted to talk about some of the injections that we've seen. And this is why we were speaking about the accomplice process in user mode. Well, we won't explain what the accomplice process is for, but depending on the operational system, depending on its version, we use either services.exe or lsas.exe. I want to use a short-created buffer that is hiding the code that they want to inject. And how do they inject it? It's amazing how easy it is, because it's almost like a syringe. It's like an injection that we could do in user mode. So we use key stack attach process, that is being executed as if it was a legitimate process, and we create a new thread with a stream that we want to link, and that's it. And this is another of the injections that is used, because sometimes the user mode process is not created when it's running in rootkit mode. So with the same callback function that we've seen before, the process protection in user mode will be asking whether there's an LSS or services process. When it finds it, it attaches to it, it reserves a new buffer, it puts the stream that it wants to inject, it saves the legitimate entry point, and it puts Selco at the original EP that would skip the legitimate one. So when this can be executed in user mode, the first thing that is executed is the Selco of this Selco of this. From this Selco, it jumps to the malware, and once the malware has done what it has to do, it can go back to its original situation and to execute the legitimate process as it should be executed. What we wanted to include here is a part of remediation. This is a code that is being executed in kernel mode, and we wanted to speak a little bit about the problems that we could have to get rid of such an infection. So, we've represented here a Necurs. I found many images of viruses on the internet, so I've picked this one, and we've represented what problems we could find to get rid of such a malware. Firstly, the commitment takes place in ring 0. And, well, the devices are working normally. In our case, they started to reboot, but I understand that they are not rebooting a full POX. In another attack, I don't think that they're going to do it at all. Again, so maybe we don't even know that we have a malware running. If we try to stop the service, if we identify what the service is, as I'm telling you, it's not very simple. But when we try to stop it, it doesn't work because basically we can't read the registry keyword. We won't be able to stop the process if we identify it. We can't delete the file, the binary file that is on the disk. And we can't execute anti-malware tools, as we've seen. If somebody thought about loading the save mode, it doesn't work either. So basically, we can't do anything. So, when we're thinking about how to remediate this, we felt a little bit like this. We looked at the computer, and it was like, unless we thought about something. And a friend of us gave us a solution. His name is Dimitri. It was worse than a coronavirus. We'll have to have a mask. Sorry, gentlemen. One question. Have you analyzed it? Yeah, of course, we've reversed it. We need to use Hydra Pro and WinDBG. And what did you see? The commands that go through the registry, there are commands to inject code to protect processes. There's one that deletes a service. They leave it there to tease. And we know how everything works. No secrets for us. But disinfecting it, that's more difficult. Why did you send commands? That you can send commands. The commands. The registry is protected. And if I told you that the spot is not protected, okay. So, we thought that we could use the commands that they had used to try to solve the rootkit. So we'll pretend to be an infected process. So why did we do this in the end? Because we thought that it was really, that it was so absurd that it works that we didn't try it until the end. But if we see the callback that is controlling the registry, as I told you, it controlled both the password registry, the password registry control, and the commands. The part on the right that controls the command protection has the protection that we are included in the infected process list, but the part that manages the commands doesn't have this protection. So, with a couple of things, we can send some commands, and well, we're going to make a demo of a couple of tools that we've developed, and how we can uninstall Rootkit and do things a little bit, well, cooler if you want. Where's my mouse? Fine, so the demo is really short. What we do, we will install the rootkit. Careful, so that we don't want anybody to get infected. No, I'm just kidding. So, we've created a service that has been called Marronero. It is in this path. It is a kernel type, and it will be executed on demand. The first thing that I will do is to execute the same rootkit that we found in the customer. Okay. We get an error because it's very tricky, and it tells us that the service has not been installed. But if you have a look at the snapshot of the process monitor, it is constantly writing on this registry keyword. And this is one of the few ways we have to identify that we have the rootkit running. So it has told us that this doesn't work and that we don't have it. but it is working. So we've done two tools. The first one helps us detect that we're infected with the rootkit. For you to have an idea, before doing these tools, it was very difficult because of all the things that we've said before. It's almost impossible to detect that we have a malware installed. We can't identify what service it is. So we have been using the command so that in user mode we are able to detect this in a quick and simple way. So the first one has been called NeCsists. It's going to analyze whether Necurs exists or not. And well, we execute it. It's very simple. And what it tells us, well, we get information about when the rootkit was installed, if there's any forensic at the in the room. I'm sure that he or she will like it. The status, as Javi said, the rootkit has a maturity date, so maybe it could be active or semi-active, the number of executions, and the name of the service. REXF. We've put the name Marronero, but it says it has changed it automatically. So if we go to the registry editor, we should find local machine system, current control set, services. Here we should find a service called REXXF. If we have a look at it, any of the servers that we have in the system needs to convey information about what they're doing. If we go to REXXF, it will tell us that it won't show us anything. Okay? So, next to the tools that we have used, we'll try to remove rootkit from the system. It says that the rootkit has been successfully removed. How can we know that? Well, you see how it is working. You see the registry keyword control. It seems that the commands are not being sent anymore, and it doesn't seem that we're going to find them. And if we go to the registry again, we need to look for one that is called REXXF that does not exist anymore. So we have disinfected the rootkit. And that was almost it. And just, well, some conclusions, very brief conclusions. We've extracted a complete and updated commands list. The problem that we found with this attack is when we detected that it was Necurs and we started to have a look at some documentation, either the command lists were not updated, or when they were full, they were not updated. When they were updated, they had 6 commands, so they didn't work. To reverse it deeply and to take all the commands at the end has helped us develop some tools. For example, the commands that we've used to disinfect the rootkit are not published anywhere, so reversing was really helpful for us in order to develop useful tools. And we can see that we are chasing the economic profit. I don't know if we've talked about it, but this was just to put a miner. It was something quite absurd. Why are we doing all this to put a miner? But, well, in the end, the bugs took 1 million euros a year with a miner. So the funny thing of this is that for the customer, well, the customer would have lost 3 million euros. So they, it's like, well, I'm taking 1 million euros, but they're spending 3, so that's it. So at the incident, if there was a miner, but maybe tomorrow we see this rootkit and they're using a ransom or a banker. We don't know that. And the last thing that we've not written here, if somebody thinks that the detection of these things is easy, the day 0, the day we found this rootkit, it was detected by an antivirus company. All the others didn't see it. And that's it. If anybody has any questions. Okay, so if you've said that you need to take all information out of the graphic interface. So any questions? Let me see those hands. We have the device to clean your hands if you want. Hello. You said I can't see ya. You said that the rootkit, in order to infect, takes the service or the else's process. It puts its serial code and it makes the E point to point that serial code to execute. But if the process is being executed, what does it do? Does it pause it and resume it, or? No, we've explained two techniques, two injection techniques. The first one is when, well, for example, these are at two different moments. When there's an infection, the device is on, so the system is running. The initialization is when a remote thread is created in LSASS. The second injection, the one that you're talking about, is when it does not exist. I don't know whether this answers your question or not. Yeah, more or less. So they have to intercept the process when it's created? No. It's the beginning of the process when the device intercepts the process. At the first infection, when the dropper comes along and puts a driver, the process has already been created, so it doesn't have to ask whether a process is being created or not. Okay. We can talk about this later if you want. Okay. More questions? More hands? Oh yeah, sorry. Hello, well, first of all, congratulations on your job. And the second thing is, well, it has been a very surgical answer for this type of infection. If we had to act infection by infection for every type of malware, we could have a scale problem. Is there any way of having some commitment indicators in a more generic way in order to facilitate the antivirus's lives? I guess that they are looking for more generic strategies rather than using the tool of the specific malware to deactivate it. Have you been able to move on a little bit more in this sense, or isn't there any other way apart from having their commands to solve it? Well, the first thing we did was to take the commitment indicators that were interesting for the customer. Of course, we didn't start to conduct a full reversing. And as it was something interesting, we started to get a little bit deeper. We didn't say that this was the only tool, but we thought that it was quite curious. For example, we usually develop our own tools, and if tomorrow we see that the antivirus has not detected, as has happened in other occasions, and we see that the indicators say that it's a Necurs infection, we'll be able to offer a solution, a quick solution to the customer. It's not that we are trying to have just one way to fix it or to have something universal, but we believe that it is quite a useful tool for some anti-incident response team. If the antivirus has not been able to detect it, we have these tools that are open source and geek cap so that everybody can access them. Well, if I can say something else, the most important problem is that they had a legitimate signature. And I think that this is why all the antivirus systems skipped it. So for the antiviruses, it will be simpler, what Javier was saying, to blacklist that server where the samples are being downloaded. But if you have it installed, careful, because we've seen all these things. I mean, if the bug gets in and if it has installed and if it has blacklisted your antivirus, I don't know up to what extent. I mean, we were beating around the bush and we could send them commands, but in the case of an antivirus, maybe it has a solution. Well, if I can take the floor, I think that the future of infection goes through what you're saying, Robert. The antivirus or all the new NG, machine learning, etc. products will be able to do things that will be highly limited. But in the end, the fact of stopping an infection using the commands that are being developed is like, how are you going to do it with an automatic tool? So how are you going to stop it? The point is that in the case of NeCsists, it's like, okay, so for forensic that's good, but in the case of NeCure, you have to execute it. So when you have everything on you, so you launch a GPO, and that's it. And so many things that we will see in protection, IR protection, and in order to solve all these things has to do with handcraft tasks rather than with automation. I think that we could have another speech about this. Last question, if there is any. No, I don't see any hand. Okay, so thank you very much. Thanks.